able to check the photographs out in our gathering area, but if not, please do that after the lecture. And I hope you stay to enjoy a little bit of a light reception afterwards. We will cross our fingers that we beat the weather, and I think we will. But I've had the pleasure of knowing Carlton since I moved here in 2000. And Carlton is a Nashville native. He is an artist, educator, curator, gallery dealer, and community leader. He graduated from a local high school, Father Ryan High School, went to Wash U at St. Louis and got his BFA, and then went to University of California where he got his MFA in design. His work focuses on images of art in the African diaspora and Black experience and history. Carlton's artwork was included in the National Traveling exhibition by the Smithsonian Institution, Reflections in Black, Smithsonian African American Photography, and was shown at the Frist Art Museum in 2003, where I have the pleasure of working and had the pleasure of really getting to know Carlton then. In addition to exhibiting his work at the Frist here in Nashville, he's exhibited at Fisk University and at the Parthenon, where he had a solo exhibition in 2005. He's also exhibited across the country, internationally, as well as lecturing. Carlton recently retired from teaching, where he has taught at the college level at Fisk, the University of North Carolina, Wilmington, Vanderbilt University, and Watkins College of Art. So with that, Carlton, I now will let you take the podium and take over. Thank you.
No, as long as I'm out of the way. Okay. All right. Well, good evening again, or afternoon, and so glad you came. I haven't had a chance to show this work in a little while. Well, actually, I have. It was last shown in at Cal Lutheran University in Burbank, California, and believe it or not, end of February 2020, just before the COVID hit. And so, so we were able to have a full program there, and then right after things happened. So, but I haven't really shown it since then, and it's really celebrating, if you can believe it or not, when I had my master's thesis show, which this work was, displaying, how many years is that ago? Now, most of you weren't even born yet. Where were you? So 40 years, and I just want to thank Nashville and my experience here as a child in a way, because the person that I saw as my pastoral leader was Reverend Kelly Miller Smith at First Baptist Capitol Hill, where I was a member, my mother also, and because of that experience, we really experienced a lot of different things. People coming to our home. My mother was very much an activist. In fact, she was coined by writer Dwight Lewis as Miss Civil Rights, and her passing. And so she would have been 101 this year. And so I just grew up in the mix, and meeting people like John Lewis and several civil rights leaders and Kwame Lillard. These people were kind of regular folks coming through my home, and I took notice. I'm the sensitive child that looked at everybody and listened, when they came to visit. And so this is a painting I did in high school. Oh, sorry. Okay, does it? Okay, because it's on here. Yes, it is on here. All right, so I don't know what happened. Did it? Okay. Well, I'm going to continue talking while Jim works. Okay. And so what happened is that I just really, and I just one individual I'd like to mention, he came to our home, he was a student, and he had they had to get out of there. And my mother coordinated with Kwame Lillard, who actually I think went down there and helped get them out of Alabama. And so, and I just want to acknowledge the family of Kwame Lillard, his daughter and grandson and his wife, and just really thank you for coming. And so, so we're still, yeah, so HDMI connection, I think. Yeah. So, so after I graduated from college and went to get my master's degree, I had to think about what I was going to do for a master's degree, for my master's thesis. And I just looked back to my childhood and I said, I'm going to do something on the civil rights movement. But here I was living in California. So I had to go back and find some money to do this because I had to get back to the East. I had to really talk a lot to my professors, my committee, because they were asking me, what does this have to do with design? And I said, well, and I talked smack, I said, it has everything to do with design. I'm going to have to design something, you know, to tell this story. And by this time, I was functioning in photography more so than graphics, but I had to design the whole exhibition, and that was my rationale. I had to shoot it, I had to find, and I pursued a partner, Arvely Ward, who was working with student publications at the time at UCLA. And I asked him if he would be interested in helping me travel with me to interview the individuals we needed to reach and to ultimately write up some text for the exhibition. And so he agreed. And what was interesting about Arvely is because here he was a California kid. He was born, his mother is Japanese, his father was African American, and his African American family was in Georgia. And so he had never met his family there. So that was another intrigue for him to come with me back to the South, which he had never been, maybe one time before, in order to meet this family. And later when he married, he ended up meeting his Japanese parents, family. Okay, we're back on business, okay. And so this painting I did in high school, I call it Mighty Shades of Freedom. And if you notice each individual, oh, the color is so much better too, have different shades of blackness, if you will. And here you have Walter White, who, anybody know who Walter White is? Okay, you want to tell us? I'm going alto, because I have the microphone. But anyway, Walter White was one of the beginning founders of the NAACP. And he, because of his complexion and look, he infiltrated the Ku Klux Klan. And that was one of his acts of bravery. And so, and then we have Frederick Douglass. And Frederick Douglass, you know, brown-skinned man. But I didn't know until much later that he was actually biracial. His mother was white, I believe. Her father was white, I think, one or the other. And so Martin Luther King, and we know about him. Mary McLeod Bethune, who was a blue-black person. And she was BFF to Eleanor Roosevelt. And she also helped start she's named, the university's named after her in Daytona Beach, Florida, Mary McLeod Bethune College. And then you have Malcolm X, who was a very red man. And then you have Andy Young. Interesting enough, he was controversial in a way because he was the only one still living. And some people felt he hadn't proven himself at that point. And he's still living 40 years later. And he has proven himself, and I think he's been a very great person. And he was a member of SNCC, I believe, as well. And so I'm going to keep it moving because I got a lot of slides, and I want to make sure we get to all of them. Oh, okay. Okay, I'm going to go back here. Do I do point at the? Okay. There we go. Okay. This image is from 16th Street Baptist Church. One of my favorite and one of the favorite images of the series. I was in the balcony. I saw this woman with her, and the red was so strong and the hat was so strong, I would say the lady in the red hat. Okay? But as we know, it's a little bit opposite that. But I just saw, and as a designer, remember, this is a design exercise, okay? I'm not a historian, so I had to approach everything as though it were a design consideration. And I just saw in that little hint of a man in front of her. I was in that balcony, and I was listening to the sermon when I was there because we were able to visit a few churches. And that's what I came up with. That's Arvely and myself in front of my home, which is now part of Belmont Science Center. I have to say this quickly, but every home I've lived in Nashville has been run over by a building. And on the house I grew up in near Centennial Park, a parking lot landed on top of it. And ultimately, all these beautiful old homes that were there, the science building landed on top of it, those buildings. And then the business I had with the Onyx building, the tornado got to it, and it imploded in 2020, I believe. And so I said, if I ever have a landmark, this is it. I don't have any landmarks to say I'm famous or anything. You're going to have to go to my work. This is Andy Young and Coretta Scott King. And the reason I mention them, at that time, there were no books about the civil rights movement. There were no comprehensive stories, written work, published works by scholars. So we had to do our own research. So we attended a nonviolent workshop at the King Center in Atlanta for a whole week. And this is when they came on the first day for the audience. And this was a precarious time because they had just come back from the Democratic Convention. Jesse Jackson had run for president, and they supported Mondale. And they really caught a lot of flack for that. And so that's why I see Coretta Scott King is going to always be proud. She's going to always give you that upper pride. But I felt Andrew Young was a bit burdened at this moment, and that's why I think this is a very important image. This is Reverend William Borders of Wheat Street Baptist Church. He was trained at Morehouse under theologian Howard Thurman, who's a great theologian, and he was the one that actually Martin Luther King apprenticed with. Daddy King, his father, who was the pastor of the street across the church across the street, Reverend Borders was the pastor of Wheat Street Baptist Church, and Ebenezer Baptist Church was across the street. And so there was a great rivalry with Daddy King and Reverend Borders. He was celebrating his 50th anniversary as pastor in 1984 when we met with him. This is in the church, and just really showing you, again, this is a design consideration. I just saw the man praying, I saw the stained glass, and I just liked what I saw, and I photographed it. And there was a lot of low light, so that's why it looks kind of painterly, because there's a lot of Now we call it noise, but back then we call it, what did we call it? All right, folks, help me. Grain, yes, thank you. This is Holt Street Baptist Church, where Reverend Everett Wilson was pastor at the time, and luckily we were able to meet with him, and he sat with us and talked. And while he talked to Arvley, I photographed him in the sanctuary. This is where the first mass meeting was held after Rosa Parks was arrested in December 1, 1954. Yes.
What city is that?
I'm sorry, that's in Montgomery, Alabama. This is Dexter Avenue Baptist Church in Montgomery as well. And this is where Martin Luther King, as a 26-year-old new pastor of Dexter Avenue, was called to lead the Montgomery boycott. And when I arrived at the church was under scaffolding for renovation. So I was forced to go inside and just kind of look and see what was happening. And we were in the basement. We came upstairs, and I walked into the sanctuary, and I saw the pulpit. So I walked up on the pulpit, and I looked back, and it was just like an epiphany. This is where he stood when he was called to lead the Montgomery boycott. And so you can still see there's some plastering on the back of the wall. They were still having some renovation done. And I just photographed, and I saw the open Bible, and I photographed it. And I was too intimidated to touch anything, so I just photographed and moved on. But later, when I had a show, I taught at Vanderbilt for 20 years as a photographer. And we had a faculty show, and someone came up, and she said, "Do you know what that book is on?" And I said, "No, I never really bothered to look. It was so quick." And she said, "It's on the first page of Exodus." And we know that's the story of Moses. So that's a real kind of serendipity kind of moment. And this is a spread in the Vanderbilt magazine, and I just wanted to share this page. Just kind of gives you a cross section. I'm going to give you references. If I just show you buildings, it's going to get a little redundant, but I want to show you things around that. And the House of Blues decided to do a CD fundraiser, and they made a CD of various gospel music. And somehow they got wind of my body of work, and they did a whole booklet in the CD. We don't have CDs anymore, really, but of my church series. And so this was an article that was written from the Nashville scene, or for the Nashville scene. This is Ebenezer Baptist Church, and this is the church where Reverend Martin Luther King pastored, as well as his father. And in there, you know, they do tours in there, and so sometimes it's blocked off, sometimes not. But I just saw the cross, and sort of a faux symmetry, if you will. It has this sort of a symmetrical feel to it. And I just wanted to, again, appeal to my designer sense. This is 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama. It's the church that was bombed in September 15, 1963, where 4 young girls were killed. And as we know, that's also the church of Condoleezza Rice, okay? And as a child. And so when I came up to the church, Kelly Ingram Park, where you saw the dogs and the attacks of the nonviolent protesters, which is literally diagonal across the street. And this is where they would organize on these steps. And you see the worn, and I looked at the wornness, the worn steps, and I said, that's it, that's the picture. to honor this church. And I came back many, many years later, and they had put that fake green turf on it, unfortunately, but what little we know sometimes. This is on 16th Street. I'm debating if this is actually my image or not. I do have an image of this stained glass, but throughout our travels through the various states, this was the only depiction of a Jesus of color. And how this happened is that in the back, and just like it would be right back where your organ is, when the church was bombed, they said it blew out parts of the stained glass, and one of them, it blew out the face of Jesus, believe it or not, that they had depicted in this traditional church. So the country of Belgium came and donated and created this particular stained glass for the church, and it's still there. And this is in the balcony area of the church. This is a matriarch figure of the church, again like the woman in the red hat, as I call it. I just saw her stand at her hat and her shawl and the colors just, and again it looks very painterly because of the grain, because it was very low light. And then you see the other parishioners just kind of, it's almost abstract. I'm somewhat of an abstract photographer. I look at the world abstractly first, and then I make sense of it later. And I saw the abstraction of that and enjoyed it. Oh, okay. It has a delay apparently, and so, okay. This is New Hope Baptist Church in Jackson, Mississippi. And this is the home church of Medgar Evers, who was the field secretary for the NAACP in Jackson, Mississippi at the time. And we know he's considered one of the martyrs of the movement. He was killed by Beckwith, I think, some type of socialite in Jackson, and when he was at his home, as he was going into his home. It rained a lot that summer, and so sometimes we had to just wait and let the rain subside so I can go out and take pictures of the edifices. But this, as it was still raining, I had an umbrella over my head. I was using a 645 camera, because this is all film-based originally. And as I was setting up, and I think Arvely was holding the umbrella over my head, and there was a sunburst. And that's why the eaves are so white. And I looked at them as like those are arrows to heaven. This is Mount Zion United Methodist Church in Meridian County, Neshoba County. Sad tale to this is the church that was bombed and burned down during Freedom Summer '64. And as these three young students, Schwerner, Goodman, Cheney, and Schwerner, I just say their last names, they were students. Cheney was local, and the other students were from the north. And as they were headed from this church, they were accosted by Sheriff Rainey and were killed, murdered. And we know that they were missing for several weeks, and their bodies were found in the river, local river. And they were tortured. Cheney was mutilated and buried in the banks of that river. And so this is an honor of them. It's a memorial tombstone. And one thing as a design, I know I got a few artists here, so I'm gonna have to talk to y'all a minute too. So you see the series of threes, the crosses? I looked at that and I said, because the church wasn't that exciting in and of itself.
So when I saw the three crosses, I saw the crosses in the window, and just sort of the angles and the brick all having crosses, and I just took advantage of that and photographed this view of the church. This is ABT Seminary in Nashville, Tennessee, and this is where the stories, the fabled stories of John Lewis, C.T. Vivian, Bernard Lafayette, and several other students who really almost sacrificed their careers and theirs to meet the demands of the civil rights movement. And Reverend Kelly Miller Smith was a dean of the school at the time, I believe. I decided to photograph just this section because I saw the door, the entry to the school. This is the administrative building, I think. And there's one window bricked up and one window open. And the reason I see the symbolism in that, and then you have the mailbox. Because ABT Seminary was in a very awkward position. It was partially funded by the Southern Baptist. They did not like what was going on. And then, of course, it was privately funded and other funding sources. So they were always, they had to really play a real toggle game of, do we do this, support these students, or do we not? And eventually they did support the students. This is Asbury United Methodist Church, and it was a little town in Alabama, I believe. And I'm trying to, I try to really, this is a long time I've been talking about this, so I'm trying to give the distinct story. It was because of the minister of this church that it really chose. There were a lot of black churches that did not support what was going on. They were afraid, basically. And some just didn't agree with what was going on with the students and what have you. And this is also the town where he was shot for marching. All right, my fault. I see my people going to help me here with this. Meredith, James Meredith, was shot in this town as he did a singular march. He was a student at Ole Miss, and it was near this church where he was, and then later the march grew. This is a church in New Haven, United Methodist Church in Clarksdale, Mississippi. And it is the church where they ran a newspaper, a freedom paper, in this basement. And Clarksdale, if you don't know where that is, it's right on the river in the Delta region, right across from Helena, Arkansas, where my grandparents eventually settled, and that's where my mother grew up. And so this really has some real, and I just wanted to shoot up at the angles and just really show its statuesque. This is Mississippi, and I don't want to downplay Mississippi, but it was a pretty impressive building for that area at the time, and still there. Okay, I don't know what's going on. It has a delay, so I'm so afraid to. The square? What square? Oh, the bottom, okay. Okay. I think it might have gone offline. Oh, that's the other thing. Yeah, it's not responding. Okay. I'm going to continue to tell you some of the. Oh, okay, good. All right. My computer is 12 years old, and it may not be in tune with this modern equipment here. Okay. All right. Okay, I want to show that one, and maybe there's one more. But this is St. John's Missionary Baptist Church in the middle of the fields in Issaquah County, Mississippi. in the Delta region. And as you can see, it's right in the middle. I think those are soybean plants. And it had started one of the first Head Start programs for young children. And for that, it was bombed. And when they rebuilt the church, it looks a little fortified, if you ask me. And we imagined that they did that because in our writings, what writings we found, it was rebuilt with fireproof brick. That was the words that were used in the book. We later found out those were restrooms because they literally had outhouses in this place. And so those are the restrooms in the front of the church that were eventually made. But again, it just sits out in nowhere and near Johnson City, Mississippi. Okay, please come forward. There was a series of trees, I think that, okay. I just had to include this. Again, I want to give you a little diversions because I just don't want to show you a bunch of buildings. We were traveling on the lonely Mississippi road at one night trying to get to our hotel. And out of the woods, I saw that bare tree just popping out like that. And it was dusk. And I said, RV was driving. I said, please stop. I'm going to take a picture of that tree. And I just, those were the pine trees. And I don't know, I just had the imagination of what it was like to be alone in the woods. Maybe in a more negative sense, maybe being lynched or something like, you have we're going through a lot of stories in our heads in these few weeks. So we imagine a lot of stuff going through the South and when we're by ourselves. And so it really has a very haunting kind of view, but I enjoyed the vertical thrust of the pines in the darkness and then this one tree just standing out like that. This is Clark Memorial in Nashville, and this is the church where Reverend James Lawson, who was another person who crossed my path several times in my childhood. He was friends with my mother, and he was the one, only other than Martin Luther King, to go to India and study nonviolence with Mahatma Gandhi. And so he came back and led nonviolent workshops to students at Fisk and TSU and what have you, and probably Vanderbilt, in the practice of nonviolence. Okay. Please go. Okay. Well, okay, we skipped one. We may be missing a space. But anyway, this is in Jackson, Mississippi. Again, one of my diversions. I was shooting a church, and I'll show you in the next slide, Pearl Street Baptist Church, which also was a church that supported the movement. And this was a little store that was down the street from it, and I was putting my stuff back in the car, my photography equipment. They just asked me to photograph them. And before I could say anything, they assembled themselves right in front of the store, just like that. And I just thought it was a great moment, and I photographed them. But again, these are the young angels that we were fighting for back in those days. Okay. All right. This is a church. I'm going to keep it moving because it's in Louisville, Kentucky. Now, I don't know much about the particular stories behind this church, but after I had done the project a few years later, a young woman approached me about including Louisville in the story. And this was a church, Fifth Avenue. It's on one of the main streets of Louisville, and in West Louisville. I said Louisville, right? Okay. And so I just really just wanted to show its stateliness. It's probably a church that may have been, I think this is a community because it had a lot of big old houses there in that community. And I think it was a church, you know, sort of where the neighborhood changed from probably a predominantly white neighborhood to a black neighborhood. And so I just enjoyed the structure of it, very stately there in the community. This is Brown's Chapel in AME. I was just there for the Selma, and this is in Selma. And I just saw the arches. I just wanted that symmetry. The church is very complex. It's a complex architecture. And I just wanted to show those, just simplify it. And this was the church where they were, they began the Selma Montgomery March in 1965, where John Lewis was in the leadership, and where they were beaten back to this church. And now that I've had a chance to actually walk from that church to the bridge, the Edmund Pettus Bridge, it's not a short walk. And for them to run back in horror, children and elderly, to the refuge of this church, it was no small feat. This is in the balcony of Brown's Chapel, and it was just people. Again, it was very grainy because it was very, very little light. But I wanted to show that kind of Jesus kind of popping out from that darker area here. And again, and the young people at that time, who will not be young anymore, but they, I guess, really wondered about their future. Yeah. This is First Baptist Church. Now, I had to realize that at this time, there were a lot of places, churches that were being torn down, gentrification was happening in certain neighborhoods, and First Baptist sold its original edifice to Life and Casualty, or the building, the Snodgrass building. And yeah, and so that's where the old church was, right across the street. And so that was built. So I had to just stay with what I found. That was my one. I said, I can't change history. I just need to capture what I see. And Reverend Kelly Miller Smith was pastor at the time. I was one of the parishioners of that church. The church had a reputation of being a lot of very educated African-American professors and doctors at Meharry and so forth. And so there was, but it was also a church, not say and it was a church that was ready to embrace the challenges of the civil rights movement at that time. And Fisk, of course. This is Claiborne Ball Church in Memphis, Tennessee. Again, it was a church that was really chose to involve itself in the civil rights movement in Memphis. Along with a church, I don't have it pictured, but Reverend Jim Lawson eventually went to Memphis to pastor church there, and I'm struggling to remember its name, but you have Centenary, thank you, Centenary, yes, absolutely, United Methodist. So I guess he was assigned there, right? He would have been assigned, yeah. So he was assigned there, and so he moved his teachings to Memphis. And Claiborne Ball was a participatory church. I want to go back one, come on, okay. I'm going to leave it there and hopefully it changes. The next one is of a woman. It was hot that summer as well. It rained, and then when it was not raining, it was hot, okay? There we go. And she was just sitting there with her shoes off and in the shade of the church, of this particular church. And I just saw it, and I really was moved by it, and I photographed her. I didn't engage her or anything. This is Church of God in Christ headquarters in Memphis, Tennessee, and we're kind of reaching toward the end of my talk. It was the location where Martin Luther King gave his final speech the night before he was assassinated in Memphis. And he delivered his famous speech, "I've been to the mountaintop." And it's a campus of buildings. I don't know if it's a school or what have you. Some people may know more about this place, but this was the building and the edifice where he gave the auditorium where he gave his speech. And since that time, in 1987, I returned to Nashville I was living in Oakland, California at the time, and thought I would stay out there. I had the honor of doing an internship at the Smithsonian in the American History division, and actually could have had a job there, but it would have been a graphic designer. And by that time, I had the pleasure of studying with the likes of Ansel Adams and other people, and Roy DeCarova. And I like the outdoors. And unfortunately, with the Smithsonian, as a graphic designer, you would have been in the catacombs of the buildings. And you know, they go pretty deep, the buildings, in the ground in 60-something degree weather, temperatures, archival temperatures. And literally that summer, I would get so cold. It was 100 degrees outside, and I would go and lay on the concrete just because I was that cold. So with that in mind, I just decided I probably wasn't a good environmental atmosphere for me. And then my option was to go back to California, okay, so hey. So I went back to California. But this was for an exhibition that I had jointly at Vanderbilt's Surratt Center and at Fisk Van Vechten. And no, it wasn't that, it was the Aaron Douglas Gallery in the library. And so I was very proud of that. They worked together so I could have a show there. And so this was an article in the Tennessean. So it was my first article about the churches here in Tennessee. This is Emmanuel AME Church in Charleston. I went to visit. They had lowered the Confederate flag in Columbia, and after that we went on to travel to Charleston, and this was just, it was just everything. Flowers, there were markings in the trees in front. It was just really plastered with all of this memorial materials and what have you. And it just happened maybe probably a few weeks, and so we went to pay our homage to that. The shooting where the 7 parishioners were killed by the confused young man, yeah. This, coming to the present, I had a chance to go to Selma, and I'm visiting Tabernacle Baptist Church, I believe, in Selma. And here they had an assembly before the march on the bridge. And that's Reverend, well, I think he is a Reverend, actually. But that's Representative Hakeem, y'all said, y'all heard that, right? Okay, Jeffries. And you see some other another famous face there, Al Sharpton, and then the guy on the left is the minister of the church presently. And so I wasn't able to move around. It was packed in the church. There was no air conditioning, and it just started getting hot. And so I just stayed put and shot from where I was located, but luckily it wasn't a huge church. But so I just saw him preaching I captured, like a few other people. But I had a lot of waste, I have to admit. The low lighting and trying to capture just things, was really challenging. This is Reverend Jesse Jackson. Here he's now, he doesn't walk, at least not in a public setting. And they really just treated him like just a real diamond. And so he could not be, they surrounded him, so it was very difficult to even photograph him. But from my angle, when they were moving him out, because they wanted him in the front line walking over the Edmund Pettus Bridge. And so I just captured that moment when they were escorting him outside. Okay. All right. Okay, there we go. This was a group, a men's Mason group. They had a very long name, but they were probably 1,000 strong. I hope I'm not exaggerating. There were a lot of them, and they made their own. Couldn't be everywhere. So this is sort of maybe 1/4 away from the march, the front line of the march, and they had already passed, and so they were coming up in their group, and this just really made quite a presence there at the Pettus Bridge. This is the last photo. There we go. And this young man decided he was going to dress up as John Lewis dressed up on the first effort march across the bridge, the Selma Montgomery March. And I just saw him there. He was very intentional, and so I didn't even ask. He knew what he was doing, and he knew his role. So he stood there and let me take a picture of him at the bridge site. And so it takes us kind of 360. That's the last image. This was a project for me that had limits. I could only cover 4 states. That's the only time my time and money would carry me. Luckily, a church in Ben Hill United Methodist in Atlanta, Georgia, commissioned me to do the work. And in return, a permanent collection was given to them for their hall, their fellowship hall. I have a little sad ending to that. That was the church that actually my aunt and uncle belonged to, and my aunt found both my uncle and aunt has passed, and just last September she passed, and I went to look for the work, and it wasn't there. So I went to the administration office and asked them where could I find the work, and apparently they had remodeled the fellowship hall, stuck the work out in a shed, and it was destroyed. And she said, "Oh, we threw that away." And I said, "That's the same, the stuff you threw away was also at the Smithsonian." And they were feeling a little bad about it, but what could they do at this point? My aunt and uncle never, I'm sure they didn't have the heart to tell me what had happened to that work, but the thing is, but I am grateful to that church that when they, commissioned me to do this, and it allowed me to complete my master's thesis. So Arby and I, in rehashing all of this, and he kind of rewrote some of the text that you see out there. He said that we're threatening to continue the work and maybe get into the Carolinas and Florida and what have you. But a lot has changed. A lot of things will not be there that we would hope to find, I'm sure. The people will not be there that we would hope to meet. So, but we can get what we can, and as we know, given what's happening today, we may need to go ahead and get it because we just don't know what's going to happen in our day. But I am so proud that I had a chance to do this, use my childhood inspiration to do this work, being all the way in California, because I almost went that Ansel Adams route. You know what I mean? I'm going to the, I'm going to the mountains. I'm going to, to shoot nature. And even though I was very inspired by that, it just wasn't my beginnings. And so I was able to reach into my childhood and dig, and it's survived with me, which is I'm just very pleased to know. And so, but if you have any questions, this is the end of my presentation, but if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer any. Yes. Gail? Can everybody hear her?
Can you hear me? I can hear your voice. But anyway, I was sitting here thinking about things I found out about your family, like your mother, that I didn't know until John Lewis died, actually. But how much do you think growing up in that environment, being exposed to the civil rights workers and your mom being so involved in that, is what led you to photograph these churches?
A lot of it was visual. Put you to work there, huh? A lot of it's very visual. I was visually inspired just by my childhood. I'll tell you one funny story. They had a party, and they had remodeled the basement. It was real nice, and they had speakers throughout the sections, but it was all one phonograph, okay? And they were all downstairs. We hear them party. There was a lot of Motown, a lot of that old Motown and stuff like that. My parents, okay, I'm sorry. And so they were all downstairs and left the kids to their own. And we had just bought our first album, and it was the first album of the Monkees. And that's who we were into, okay? And so there was a pause in the music because there were singles and albums. And we got the bright idea to play the Monkees. We're gonna play the Monkees. And we did that, and we just heard this uproar from the basement. And somebody ran up the stairs to, because they weren't exactly pleased with our music choices. But things like that just gives you an impression. It was just living that experience, like I said, the young man with the afro, visual, going to hear. My mother actually lied to my school to take me to Fisk, to the chapel to hear Jesse Jackson one day. And it was there I heard, "You Are Somebody." And that stuck with me in my mind to this day. You are somebody. And so it was just things like that. I remember when they had all that ruckus with Alabama, and because you had a phone, one phone in the house ringing all the time, and communicating with different individuals. And I did ask Kwame about his experience there. He did correct some things, but he went down there actually, right, and to retrieve them, the students that were stuck. And so in the middle of the night, so they had to be on call, on guard to receive any information that whole evening. And then my mother told me the story later on about John Lewis coming from Alabama. He was not a wealthy person. He was very poor. He came with one bag and one outfit, really, and she with the church and helped him get accommodated here at the seminary. So you hear these little stories, but again, it was all visual, all, I can't remember a lot of things spoken, but I just remember the attitude And one, one funny story that Jim Lawson shared with me, and I'm looking at you, Janet, because I went to this workshop, and he was, I went to, told him again who I was to remind him, and he started laughing. And I was saying, well, what's so funny? And he recalled a story of my mother, and they were at some kind of protest or some kind of where Stokely Carmichael was speaking. And those who knew him, he was a very outspoken, super proud young black man. And, but he was speaking really kind of really coarse, and what have you. And my mother always kind of liked decorum. And she whispered over to Reverend Lawson, she said, if he had his, I feel like going over there beating him myself like that. And because he was very offended by his demeanor. And so, again, it's just really, it was my life. It was part of my life, going to various schools. I went from kindergarten school over there by Vanderbilt. I'm trying to think of the name of it right now, where the dragon is. That little Aiken. I was the first black student, one of 3, in the first grade to go to what is now University School. It was Peabody Dim at the time. There is a letter that I've kept, but I'm trying to find it. But it wrote acceptance letter of my coming to Peabody Dim, and it quoted they quoted that when we desegregate. They acknowledged in the letter that they were a segregated school until that point. And so several members of First Baptist Church ended up going to Peabody Dim, if I'm not mistaken. My brother went, and he later graduated from there, but he was an upper grade. And just living in my neighborhood, where we were in the crossroads of a changing neighborhood. It was a established white neighborhood. Black professionals moved in, and then whites went to the suburbs. And then as time went on, Bordeaux or Enchanted Hills became the Golden Coast for many black Nashvillians. So they went and built their houses and what have you. And the neighborhood kind of changed, and it grew a little poorer and blah, 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 blah. So here I was living in a neighborhood such as that, and then going to university school, okay? And there's some other stories about my first grade teacher. You could just love your teacher to death, and even though you later find out something's not right, her supporting George Wallace, and it was very disappointing because I was aware of these things, and I knew George Wallace was a bad man. So I couldn't put that together, but she was the same one who let me ride in her Skylark convertible during our school field trips. And so, give me donuts, too. But anyway, the power of the donuts, okay? So then I went to Wharton, where a good friend was a teacher there in the 4th grade. And there's reasons for that, because I just wasn't learning at university school, and I was a year younger anyway. So I went there and got special treatment at Wharton, but then I was out of my district, sent us to jail. But anyway, and then I went to head school, 5th grade, and I'll try to keep this short. The teacher there told my mother, the only thing I was learning how to do is fight. And so we ended up going to Catholic schools, Cathedral. I went to St. Anne. I went to school in Maryland. I went to Maryland. And then I came back to Father Ryan, where I graduated. So I went to a lot of schools. Yeah. Yes.
Okay, I was asking if you could tell me more about your mother, because you sounded like you draw a lot of inspiration from your mother, and I'd like to know more about her.
Hang on.
Well, what I can say probably is more than we have time for, but she was an incredible person. I mean, she grew up poor in Arkansas, picked cotton, but her best friend was a little Jewish girl. And when they were young, and they're young, they hang out, so everybody hangs out. But so she would tell the story of going to a store where her father owned, and apparently there's bad luck in the Jewish tradition to let the first customer leave without buying something. So they would play the game of trying to buy something and making it difficult for the owner. So he had to make some concessions so they could get whatever they were getting. So that was the good luck charm. And she would tell me stories like that. And then an elder black woman, as she passed, going through her community, would always refer to her as my beautiful black child. And that gave my mother a lot of confidence. She's the first to go to college, Lemoyne-Owen. She only got $50 from my grandfather the whole time she was in school. She later went on to Lemoyne Northwestern, grad school later with the intent of going to med school. And she applied for a grant at Northwestern. And she had a Jewish roommate, believe it or not, back in the 40s, okay? She did have an interruption. She had to make, for the World War II, she had to make bullets or something. There was some little interruption there that she, but anyway, she did not get to the fellowship. And somehow it was written or heard that the dean said that apparently Miss Wilkinson does not realize she's a Negro. And they did not give the fellowship to her because of that reason, even though she had the grades. And so that really, almost broke her spirit, but it didn't. And she ended up going to NYU and studying physical therapy. And so she mothered the Meharry program in physical therapy, and later was Centennial Arts, Parkview Hospital. And so she was a groundbreaker. I mean, wherever she went, however she went, she would, break the rules. And that was her life, really. She was, even when my parents divorced, and my mother did like fur coats, so she would go over to that store, what was it, something on West End? Yeah, and she would buy, and she'd put it on layaway and buy a fur coat. And the First Baptist, her fellow the wives and what have you, how did you get that, because usually the husbands buy you the fur coat. And she'd just say, oh, somebody bought it for me. She would just, but when she got caught up into the movement about furs and animals, and she never wore those coats again. She never, ever. So again, she listened to the times. She put her ear to changing times. We went to Peabody Dim for a reason. We were desegregating it, okay? We did things that were unusual growing up. But again, we knew where the trenches were. And so it was just kind of that life. And we had to work. I never had a free Saturday morning. We had to clean, and so I know how to mop a floor. I know how to do these things, okay? So that was the type of person she was. She was just really, she knew that we had a purpose. And certainly I found that purpose in doing this project. And I've done some other things I like to say since then. I'll hold that off for later. Okay, and it will bite me back. But anyway. Yes, absolutely. But listen, if there's no other question, oh, yes.
First, I have a long history with Carlton, but I also had the honor to know your mom. And she was everything that you said, but like I was a perfect stranger coming down here, and it was like we used to go to Sweats all the time and eat and talk. And she just talked and just shared all of what you just shared with everybody. And she was just that kind of a person that it just, if she knew you, if she had a sense about you, you became her friend right away too. But like Carlton, you are amazing with your work. I mean, I have known Carlton for a really long time, probably as long as I've been down here in '79 whenever you came back to Nashville. And I think when you went to Charlotte, I kind of said that when you first came in, I remember when he just hopped into his car and he just went. So I guess my question is with all of that, when you're traveling down to Mississippi and all these places, I know you well enough that you typically work by yourself. So were you down in Mississippi traveling by yourself during those days, or what was that like?
Well, I can give you probably what you imagine. I have an imagination like everybody else, and I'll just tell you most recently, I did have a travel partner who's right back there, fellow photographer, and Kevin was doing the driving. We couldn't get a hotel in Selma. They were all sold out, so we had to go way out, about 30 miles out. And to get there was all lonely roads. And because he photographs for Reuters magazine, and so he was working. And so on our way back, it was lonely out there. It was dark. It was it was nothing to see, nothing. And we had just come back from all the stories from the Civil Rights Movement. And that just makes your imagination go wild, okay? We couldn't wait to get to that hotel. and kind of back then when I did the project in '84, there were times when my partner and I really had to go and be out in the lonely woods and what have you, spaces, you know, and again, with all this in our minds, you know, and that just leads to a lot of, let's get back. But we did it, you know. We weren't going to be stopped. We weren't going to be deterred from it, but it was quite challenging. She said she met Cheney.
Yeah, Cheney, like I had met Cheney back in the '60s. I'm kind of dating myself too, but when you mentioned him, it just brought all of that back because I just kept thinking what all of the civil rights workers went through during those times. I mean, we go down there. This was the third time I was down at Selma again, and I just time and place and location, and I guess 1965. I mean, really.
I think we're going to be going through a lot of dark woods in the next few years, and metaphorically. But we're going to have to be pretty fearless. I think there's a lot of things to run from, worry about, concern yourself with. But just like what's happening at the Smithsonian, since I have this affiliation with the Smithsonian, and what's going to happen with the African American Museum under that kind of pressure. The director of the Smithsonian, I'm proud to say, I went to school with at UCLA, Lonnie Bunch. And he was at UCLA when I was there, and that's where we met. And just what he's going to have to endure dealing with the new administration. We know what's happening with the Kennedy Center. So, and then before I want to do this officially, there's a show coming up, and again, being fearless, the Customs House in Clarksville, which is a state museum, and I'm just becoming familiar with them, but they agreed to show an exhibition that I'm curating along with a curator at East Tennessee State University, Carlotta, and she's from Philippines, and it's called Embracing Blackness, Diasporic Unions. And we are under the umbrella, because, you know, you read the one drop rule, all the things, the rules that have been made for our definition. So we're looking at culture, tribalism, nationalism. So one story I'll give is my ex-sister-in-law. She is half Japanese and half black, lives in Oakland. And her mother literally took a boat from Japan, pregnant, with her to be with her husband, who's African-American in the military. And they stayed together until he died, unfortunately, first, and she just passed last year. And so her name is Grace. And she is one of my subjects because the slave narrative is not the only narrative of African Americans in this country. We have lots of stories, lots of multiple identities. And so the show is encompassing all of that. And 40 artists strong, which I'm really proud we were able to pull together. Armand is going to be one, a professor at Belmont University, and Rod Magaha, and Kevin Worm, and Landry Butler. There's some of the artists who will be participating in this show, several artists. And so that opens May 10th, and I'd love for you to look out for it. It's a 3-month run. May 10th, okay? And it will be from 5 to 7. That's a Saturday. So I'm trying to spare people of that traffic between Nashville and Clarksville. But it's going to be, just from the work I've seen thus far, it's going to be and it's going to stay in as much as we can in the positive. We kind of get a little bit away from the slave narrative, you know, the woe is me. It's going to be like my ex-sister-in-law who, you know, she's a love story, made her, okay? And so many stories that are positive. You know, everybody choose whom they love, whether they're a different religion, different race, nationality, tribe. You know, we have those stories in this country, and that's what makes this country great. So anyway, I think we probably need to have some food now. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Carlton. Please, we've got a reception in the gathering area just right outside, so please stay and enjoy.